Hello, wine lovers! I am Yaroslava, sommelier and wine educator, your guide on this journey through a world of wines, spirits, and cocktails. The hero of our present meeting is Carmenere. Three grape varieties that originated in France have found a new homeland in South America, where they have flourished and become a flagship grapes of their respective countries. Today, Tannant represents Uruguay, Malbec symbolizes Argentina, and Carmenere stands for Chile. The migration stories of Tannant and Malbec follow a fairly typical path, but the modern history of Carmenere is a tale of human slip-up. Originated in Médoc, a region in Bordeaux, Carmenere is an ancient French variety with roots tracing back to the Roman Empire. It was one of the 6 classic varieties traditionally permitted in red Bordeaux blends, alongside Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. For centuries, these 6 varieties defined Bordeaux reds. In 2019, Bordeaux authorities authorized 4 additional varieties to help winemakers adapt to climate change. Until then, the entire red Bordeaux palette was limited to these 6 grapes. Until the mid-19th century, Carmenere was widely cultivated in Médoc and its neighboring grape region, playing an essential role in Bordeaux winemaking. Carmenere is a variety that requires a long ripening period, plenty of sun, and warm climate. When fully ripe, it produces rich, deep wines with medium tannins, offering aromas of black and red fruits alongside with pronounced herbal and peppery notes. However, when underripe, Carmenere imparts strong flavor of tomato leaves and green pepper due to the presence of toxopyrazines, compound responsible for these vegetable characteristics. In small amount, these substances can add intriguing complexity to the wine, but in excess will overpower the flavor. As the grape ripens, the concentration of methoxypyrazines decreases, allowing the fruity and spicy notes to dominate. In Bordeaux, Carmenere was traditionally used in blends, an approach typical of a region, which rarely produces single varietal wines. It thrived in Bordeaux's vineyards until 1867, when phylloxera, a tiny but devastating insect, swept through Europe's vineyards. When Bordeaux winemakers began restoring vineyard vineyards after the disaster, Carmenere was largely abandoned. There were 2 main reasons for this. First, it was less productive than Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot, more susceptible to disease and more demanding of sunlight, something Bordeaux's climate couldn't provide every year. Second, Carmenere struggled to adapt to American rootstocks, which had become the only effective solution against phylloxera. Eager to replant vineyards as quick as possible, Bordeaux winemakers chose more resilient and productive varieties, leaving Carmenere behind. The grape almost disappeared from French soil, though not entirely. A few tiny vineyards in Bordeaux still cultivated, but today it exists more as a living relic than a significant player in the region's winemaking. Meanwhile, in the 1850s, before the phylloxera invasion, Chilean winemakers imported Merlot wines from France and began cultivating them. However, the resulting wine has an unusual taste, something similar to typical Merlot, yet distinctly different. Rather than questioning the identity of their wines, Chilean winemakers attributed the difference to the influence on local soil and climate. They even declared it a unique Merlot clone and named it Merlot Sélection or Merlot Pemot, after the Pemot Valley where it first planted. Although Chile's first grape wines could arrive as early as the 16th century, and winemaking was deeply embedded in the local culture, for most of its history, Chilean wine was produced mainly for domestic consumption. Quality was not the primary concern, and for centuries, Chile lagged behind the rest of the world in the fine winemaking. But changed in the 1970s, the Chilean winemakers started to realize they were falling behind the global wine industry. However, true development only took off in the 1990s, after the country transitioned away from Pinochet's rule and adopted a more open economy. With greater access to modern techniques and international markets, Chilean winemaking flourished, and flourished rapidly. In 1991, French empiriographer Claude Vallat suggested that Chilean Merlot might actually be Merlot. A few years later, his student Jean-Michel Boursicot used genetic analysis to confirm that a significant portion of what we believed to be Merlot was in fact a nearly extinct Carminier. At that point, the Chilean winemakers got involved, and by 1998 it became clear that approximately half of Chile's Merlot wine was actually Carminier. Even more surprisingly, the two varieties were completely intermingling in vineyards, that led to the inevitable task to sorting out the mix, a process that would be small feat. Why not just leave things as they were? Simply put, because the wine was not great, and for good reason. As mentioned earlier, Carminier is a late ripening variety, while Merlot ripens much earlier. As a result, Carminier was often harvested unripe, introducing the overpowering herbaceous green flavor to the wine. And before anyone brings up selective harvesting, let's be realistic. If winemakers had not realized for over 150 years that they had two different grape varieties mixed together, they certainly weren't sorting them at harvest. Besides, selective harvesting is costly and inefficient. It was far better to properly separate the wines once and don't leave rather to continue dealing with unnecessary headache. The fact that no one noticed it mix-up for 150 years still amazes me. Yes, Carminier and Merlot wines do look alike, both in terms of leaves and grape clusters. They're not identical, but they're certainly similar, which isn't surprising considering they share the same ancestor, Cabernet Franc. Carminier is a cross between Cabernet Franc and Gros Cabernet, while Merlot comes from Cabernet Franc and Magdalene Noir de Charente. And for the matter, Cabernet Sauvignon is also part of the family. It is a cross between Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc. One key difference between Carminier and Merlot is timing. Carminier blooms earlier but ripes later. But let's be honest, who really pays attention to minor details like this? However, there is one glaring clue that should have raised some eyebrow. The name Carminier comes from the word crimson, referring to its vibrant red foliage in the fall. Not many grape varieties turn red in autumn. For most of them just fade brown. Merlot, for example, turns brown. And yet, for a century and a half, not a single winemaker found it strange that every autumn some of their wines blaze scarlet among the sea of brown. No one thought to ask why. But better later than never. Once Carminier was finally recognized and separated from Merlot, its modern revival began. Climate of Chile is perfectly suited for winemaking. The country is a patchwork of valley separated by ridges that stretched from the towering Andes to the Pacific Ocean. There is abundant sunshine and warmth, while the necessary coolness comes from two sources: cold air descending from the snow-capped mountains, and the air chilled by the cold Humboldt current creeping up to the valley from the ocean. The soil are excellent, and even phylloxera, the pest that once devastating European vineyards, cannot survive here. As a result, Chile is one of the few places in the world where Vitis vinifera is still grown on its own roots, without grafting on the American rootstocks. Carminier thrives in the Chilean central region, where it gets the sun and heat it requires. This area includes the hottest winemaking zone in the country, Aconcagua, and the Central Valley, which is divided into four key subregions: Maipo, Rapel, Curiel, and Maule. Chile produces both pure variental Carminier and blends with Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc. However, it is important to note that according to Chilean law, the variental wine can contain up to 50% of another grape variety. So if a bottle is labeled Carminier but doesn't specify 100%, it likely includes a small percentage of another grape, often Syrah or Petit Verdot. More than 80% of the world's Carminier is produced in Chile. So if you are holding a bottle of Carminier, chances are quite high that it's come from Chile. But not entirely. Carminier has also found its way into Italy, China, the USA, France, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. And true to its nature, Carminier has a habit to sneak into the new land unnoticed, often masquerading as a grape variety. Take northern Italy, for example. In the 1990s, the Lombard estate Ca' del Bosco imported Cabernet Franc from the French. But something seemed off. This Cabernet ripened earlier than expected, had lower tannins, and its flavor profile did not quite match Cabernet Franc. Sound familiar? Around the same time, Chilean were uncovering Carmenère in their Merlot vineyards. The Italians decided to double-check their Cabernet Franc, and sure enough, it was Carmenère. Today, Italy produces Carmenère-based wines in the region of Veneto, Friuli, Venezia Giulia, and Sardinia. A similar story unfolded in New Zealand. Carmenère arrived from Italy again as a Cabernet Franc. Once the Italians had unmasked their mistaken identity, the New Zealanders followed suit, uncovering their own hidden Carmenère. In China's Ningxia province, many wines were imported from Europe over the years. Among them was a variety known as Cabernet Garnish, a name that likely comes from a German word Gemisch, meaning mixed, suggesting it was some kind of Cabernet blend. But something about Cabernet Garnish seems suspicious. The wine often carried a green pepper aroma, telltale sign of Carmenère. With Carmenère being rediscovering around the world, researchers decided to take a closer look. Genetic testing confirmed the Cabernet Garnish was actually a mix of Carmenère and Cabernet Franc. As a result, China now produces some Carmenère officially. Meanwhile, South Africa, Australia, and the USA made a deliberate effort to plant Carmenère and ensure the variety did not go extinct. In the United States, Carmenère is mainly grown in Walla Walla Valley, Washington and Oregon states, and California. When fully ripe in warm climate, Carmenère produces a dense, full-bodied wine with a deep purple hue. It has medium soft tannins, medium acidity, and a tannin level somewhat between Cabernet Franc and Merlot. The flavor profile includes black and red fruits, with distinct notes of spice, herb, and pepper, and sometimes hints of liver, tobacco, and chocolate. Carmenère is typically drunk relatively young and can age up to 6 years, but rarely longer. Faint for its medium tannins and medium acidity, Carmenère pairs well with a wide variety of dishes. It is perfect with roasted pork and lamb, but also complements dark poultry, healthy fish like tuna, octopus, and various cheeses. Vegetables and herbs also make excellent pairing, especially eggplant, zucchini, mushroom, olive, corn, and sweet potato. For an extra touch, adding green pepper to a dish enhances Carmenère natural herbaceous notes. And for true fans of a grape, November 24 is official World Carmenère Day, a perfect excuse to open a bottle and celebrate. I just returned from Chile and brought back with Carmenère. Vino Indomita Grand Reserva 2023. Since it's from the southern hemisphere, the wine is 6 months older than wines from the north. It is a pure Oriental, made from 100% Carmenère. Vino Indomita is a relatively young and small producer, at least compared with giants like Concha y Toro. However, it has earned a strong international reputation, with its wine sold in 40 countries beyond Chile. The Carmenère for this wine comes from Maipo Valley, an ideal terroir for variety, offering abundant sun and warmth, balancing cool night temperature. The vineyard was established in 1999, meaning the wine is now 25 years old. They are planted in granite soil with excellent drainage and drip irrigation to use to ensure optimal growth condition. The estate winemaker maintains a moderate planting density and limits the number of grape clusters per vine, enhancing the aromatic intensity of the wine. This approach also allows the grape to fully ripe, preventing the excessive herbaceous note that can occur with under-ripening Carmenère. Gran Reserva. Chile has adopted a traditional Spanish labeling system: Reserva, Reserva Special, Reserva Privada, Gran Reserva. However, they have borrowed the name rather than the classification rules. The only official requirement is a minimum of 6 months in oak barrels for red wine, regardless of category. In this case, the aging period is exactly 6 months in the oak. Let's try. This one for you, this one for me. Black fruits, hint of smoke. full-bodied, silky texture, soft, well-balanced tannins. Intensive fruit-forward aroma with notes of black pepper and violet. A long, pleasant aftertaste. It's a very good, elegant, powerful carminier. Excellent representation for variety. Stay with me, subscribe to my channel. Feel free to ask questions and don't hesitate to support me. Salud!